The purpose of this podcast is to help you experience freedom by letting go of anger and resentment. Anger is a feeling that arises when something doesn't meet your expectations or standards. So, how do we stop being angry? There are two paths we can take. The first path is we can change the world and other people so that everything meets our expectations and our standards. That's path number one. Hold that thought. Now there's path number two. You can surrender your expectations and standards. Hold that thought. It's quite obvious that most of the world has opted to take path number one. Most people in the world want to get out there, they want to change the world and other people so that everything meets their expectations and standards. The problem is they're not successful and it makes them angry. And that's why you see people battling life everywhere you look, whether it's in the form of their own lives or society in general. The problem with this approach is that no matter how much energy you expend, the world and other people are ultimately beyond your control. That's why you can never arrive at a future where life is exactly as you want for more than a few minutes. Now let's take a look at path number two. Remember, path number two is where you surrender your expectations and standards. So, under path number two, most people struggle with it because it seems to them that like they are giving up on their well-founded expectations and thus their chance at happiness and safety in life. After all, if I give up my expectations that people shouldn't cheat on exams and accept it, aren't I simply contributing to the problem by looking the other way? This is how the ego mind tries to justify anger and resentment as a way of living and showing up in the world. But we all know that violence only begets violence and resentment. In many ways, mankind has been mired in the cycle of violence for thousands of years. We try to make other people conform to what we want and need, regardless of what is right for them. We enforce contracts, use the legal system, apply psychological pressure, and when those fail, we resort to violence. And yet, as parents of every small child know from firsthand experience, what an angry child needs is not really punishment, but love and understanding. Sometimes that love comes in the form of punishment, but it originates from love. You see, we can punish a child out of anger or out of love. In both cases, we are punishing the child, but the place it comes from is what makes all the difference in the world. We all know that deep down we have selfish, unhealthy, and contradictory cravings. Rather than trying to pretend they don't exist and treating everyone who displays a hint of them with anger, judgment, and disgust, we can learn to see these people as individuals who have not yet learned to fully love themselves. They need our help. And as hard as it can be to be loving towards someone who has done something terrible, it's the only way to truly end the cycle of violence and repression that mankind has lived in for thousands of years. So the next time you get angry, ask yourself what walls you are building against letting be as they are. Then really, truly explore those walls. What expectations or standards can you not give up? What are you holding on to with dear? Because the peace, love, and freedom that you seek already exists on the other side of those obstacles. Now let's take a shift and focus for a minute, and let's talk about thoughts and reactions. Your thoughts and your reactions increase the flame of anger. The more you react on it, the more destructive it becomes. Start looking at your anger with a distance. It is not necessary that we show a reaction to everything, step back and ask yourself if the matter is really worth responding to. And I want to share a story to help put this into perspective. It's a beautiful story, a little disturbing. A carpenter went home after shutting down his workshop. After he left, a black poisonous cobra entered his workshop. The cobra was hungry and hoped to find its supper lurking somewhere within the shop. It slithered from one end to another and finally bumped into an axe and got slightly injured. In anger and revenge, the snake bit the axe with full force. But really, what could a bite do to a metallic axe? Instead, the cobra's mouth started bleeding. Out of fury and arrogance, the cobra tried its best to strangle and kill the object that was causing it pain by wrapping itself around the axe. The next day, when the carpenter opened the workshop, he found a dead cobra wrapped around the axe blades. The cobra didn't die because of someone else's fault, but faced these consequences merely because of its own anger and wrath. Anger. Hold that thought. So how do you get rid of anger? I believe emotions are very complex and powerful. Anger seems to me to be one of the most powerful. I don't think there are easy answers to what's being asked here. You know, the question posed being, how do you get rid of anger? But I do think there are answers. I'll try to resist writing a whole audio book, but if I do say too much, at least hopefully there will be at least one or two things that was helpful. One way of thinking about anger is that there are two types: short-term and long-term. Short-term is when someone or something upsets us, but we get over it rather quickly. Long-term anger, on the other hand, is anger that accumulates inside us. It comes from being badly hurt, from little hurts that we don't resolve, and especially from dwelling on our hurts of any kind. When enough anger accumulates inside us, we will become an angry person. You've known people like that, and you may even be an angry person yourself. Regardless, I applaud you for wanting to get rid of the anger that you have. One characteristic of an angry person is that they will get angry a lot of times at lots of things, including little things. You'll notice that they get way more angry about something than what most people would think is appropriate. The smallest slight will set them off. The reason is that they are not only angry at the small slight, they are also bringing in the anger that has accumulated inside them. I think of this as being like a person playfully slapping us on the back, like when they say something like, "I'm glad to know you." That kind of slap doesn't normally hurt, but if you have a sunburn, then it does. It's not so much the slap really, but the pain and hurt that was already there. That person will react much more strongly to the slap than a person who doesn't have a sunburn or whose sunburn has healed. Others have compared it to hot buttons. A hot button is something that is wired back to an old, unhealed hurt that makes the current button extremely hot and volatile. So it seems important to me to take care of little things that make us angry very quickly so they don't accumulate. Remember, though, that if a person gets angry easily or lots of little things make them angry, it may indicate that there is accumulated long-term anger inside. In that case, it may not be possible to just take care of little things quickly. Long-term accumulated anger is harder to get rid of, but I think we can make progress on that too. Here are some suggestions. Number one, change your thinking. I believe that when something happens or someone says something, we instantly make a judgment about it. But the processor in our brain is so fast in these cases that we don't realize that we are making a judgment. To us, it feels like it was just that they did something and we got ticked. But actually, there is a step in between. Based on our values, upbringings, beliefs, experiences, heroes, etc., we make an instant judgment about the thing that was said or done, and then we react. So if someone gives person A a funny look, person A may think instantly without realizing it that's just how my dad used to look at me before he beat me up. And that's also how my ex-boyfriend or girlfriend looked at me. So I'm being threatened. This person is out to get me. Person A will probably get angry and defense, but if the same person looks at person B the same way, person B may think instantly and without realizing it that I wonder what is wrong with that person. They don't even know me, so I know it's not me. And if they don't like the way I look or what I'm wearing, they are entitled to their opinion, but it's not necessarily right, and I can dress how I want to anyway. That thinking will lead to a totally different response in person B. You can see the same thing fairly easily in the way different people remember what person's tone of voice was. Their perception of the tone of voice is colored by their own experiences. All this tells us that it is good to process, aka think it through, the things that happen that make us angry and try to identify what we were thinking, what judgment was made, what values of ours led us to respond in anger. For example, I am very defensive around salespeople and am sometimes rude when they try to sell me something that I didn't ask for. One day when I was feeling annoyed because someone was doing this, I remembered a time years ago when I was looking for a suit and a salesman assumed I was buying one that I never said I was going to buy. He put me up on the stand, put the suit on me, was marking on it with their chalk, pinning it up, etc. When I casually mentioned, I'm going to have to think about this, he got all irate and offended. That event affected me and still affects how I view it when people try to sell me. So if we can be aware of what we're thinking and why this situation brought out such a strong reaction in me, it can help. We can decide if our thoughts are valid or not, important or not, desirable or not, and it can reduce our anger. Okay, 2. Another aspect of thinking is that it is important not to dwell on our hurts and go over them again and again. Psychologists call this rumination, and it leads to depression. It is also a way of feeding the hurt, keeping it alive and giving it power. Not only did that person hurt us at the time, we allowed them to hurt us over and over again as we dwell on it. It is a very unhealthy way to think. I am not saying we should deny our feelings, that is unhealthy too. But dwelling on the negative experiences and our interpretations of it will indeed make us negative. 3. Another aspect of thinking is that we can deliberately choose the things that matter most to us. Focus our attention on them and let that put other things in proper perspective. For example, there are things that are not really that important. So, for example, if I want to make my family the most important thing to me, I think about them often and even think things like that I can't wait to have dinner with my family tonight. If I dwell on that throughout the day, I will be less likely to let smaller things ruin my day or put me in a terrible mood so that it ruins the time I hope to spend with my family that night. Personally, I'm a Christian, and Christianity teaches some very different things that are really important and substantial instead of the things we worry about so much, like not letting anyone put us down, being better than others, or being self-centered, etc. 4. Anytime you start feeling angry, deliberately choose to engage your rational mind. That's the real benefit of counting to 10. It's not just to buy time, it is to cause you to think rationally. Actually, it's probably even better to count backwards from 600 to 500 because it is more challenging. If we get on an emotional train, it won't lead to a good place, and that's exactly what we tend to do when we feel threatened by someone's words or actions. But engaging our rational brain helps us not be as emotional, instead be wise in the way we respond. If we respond the way we feel like, it will usually escalate matters and increase our own anger. A rational response is better. You can also engage your brain by making yourself stop and use actual words to explain to yourself what is going on at the moment. For example, he just said, and I felt threatened right now. I really want to punch him in the mouth, but I know he's going through a divorce and he's not at his best, so, da-da-da-da. So that would be an example of engaging the brain by making ourselves stop and use actual words to explain to ourselves what is going on at the moment. Number 5, actually give people the benefit of the doubt. We say this is a good thing to do, but then we rarely do it. In my experience, people usually have no doubt in our minds whatsoever about what the other person said, what they meant, and why they said it. I have a friend who gives the benefit of the doubt in a humorous, helpful way. He says anytime another driver does something stupid or selfish, he tells himself that they probably have diarrhea. Well, most likely they don't, but there may be many reasons why they did what they did, other than that they think that you're an idiot and they singled you out to make your life miserable. Thinking diarrhea gives them the benefit of the doubt, and the humor of it helps us realize that what they did is probably no big deal in the grand scheme of things. I'd rather give them the benefit of the doubt and treat them better than they deserve than think the worst, get angry, and treat them worse than they deserve. Okay, number 6, exercise, or at least go for a walk. Again, you don't go for a walk just to buy time. There are actual biological reasons for physical activity. When someone says or does something that threatens us, the body prepares for fight or flight. That includes sending adrenaline to the large muscles in case we need fight or flight. But if we don't use that adrenaline, it remains there unused and is harmful to us. So we can put it to good use in walking or exercise, and then it will go away. What's more, when we exercise, we also stimulate positive hormones that will actually make us feel better. Okay, that's number 6. Now number 7. Be careful about venting. I think the idea of venting was to help us not deny our feelings or keep them stuffed inside. So we were encouraged to let everything out. But merely venting isn't going to take care of the anger and sometimes can have the same effect as the rumination mentioned above. We can also do foolish and harmful things while we are venting. And we can negatively affect the person we are venting to. Where they actually might take on some of our own anger. I sure don't think we should deny that we are feeling angry when we are, and I do think it is helpful to find appropriate ways to express our anger. I just don't think venting is the right way. There is now also research that supports this. Be patient with yourself. You did not accumulate anger overnight, so it won't go away overnight. Just keep working at it in ways like what I mentioned above every day. Okay, well, thank you for listening. Before I let you go about the importance of letting go of anger and negative emotions, let me summarize some of the facts. 1, in the right context, negative emotions like anger, grief, sadness, or jealousy are perfectly normal. Long-lasting bouts of negative emotions can stop you from being able to enjoy life. Coping strategies can help to curb persistent negative feelings and any negative emotions. But what are negative emotions and what can they do? Negative emotions can be described as any feeling which causes you to be miserable and sad. These emotions make you dislike yourself and others and reduce your confidence and self-esteem and general life satisfaction. Emotions that can become negative are hate, anger, jealousy, and sadness. Yet in the right context, these feelings are completely natural. Negative emotions can dampen our enthusiasm for life depending on how long we let them affect us in a way we choose to express them. Okay, so what can happen if we don't let go of that anger, those negative emotions? It can cause a negative downward spiral. Negative emotions stop us from thinking and behaving rationally and seeing situations in their true perspective. When this occurs, we tend to see only what we want to see and remember only what we want to remember. This only prolongs the anger or grief and prevents us from enjoying life. The longer this goes on, the more set the problem becomes. Dealing with negative emotions inappropriately can also be harmful. For example, expressing anger with violence. But we don't always express anger with violence because emotions are so complex. And when emotions are complex, we have complex reactions. Again, emotions are complex reactions involving many biological and physiological processes within our bodies. Our brain responds to our thoughts by releasing hormones and chemicals which send us into a state of arousal. All emotions come about in this way, whether positive or negative. It's a complex process, and often we don't have the skills to deal with negative feelings. That's why we find it hard to cope when we experience them. Okay, so how do we deal with these negative emotions? There are a number of coping strategies to deal with negative emotions. These include 1. Don't blow things out of proportion by going over them time and again in your mind. 2. Try to be reasonable. Accept that bad feelings are occasionally unavoidable and think of ways to make yourself feel better. 3. Relax. Use pleasant activities like reading, walking, or talking to a friend. 4. Learn. Notice how grief, loss, and anger make you feel and which events triggered those feelings so you can prepare in advance. 5. Exercise. Aerobic activity lowers your level of stress chemicals and allows you to cope better with negative emotions. 6. Let go of the past. Constantly going over negative events robs you of the present and makes you feel bad. Okay, thank you for listening to my podcast. It's been a pleasure. Please consider subscribing.